I met Claire 8 years ago. She was my everything, smart, beautiful, a little stubborn, but she kept me grounded. I was a structural engineer, she was a teacher. We had a simple life, and we liked it that way. After years of saving, we finally moved into a place we loved, the Dakota, one of the oldest buildings in New York City. The history was rich, the architecture stunning, but more than that, Claire had fallen in love with it at first sight. I should have known something was wrong the first night we spent there. At exactly 3:13 a.m., I woke up to Claire sitting up in bed, staring at the wall. "Claire?" I whispered. She didn't react. Just sat there, breathing slow, deep. I touched her shoulder, and she shivered, like she hadn't realized I was there. Then, she lay back down and went to sleep. Over the next month, she became different. Her skin got pale, almost gray. Her cheekbones sharpened. She lost weight so fast I could see her ribs when she changed. Her eyes looked darker, not just the irises, but the whites, like something was staining them from the inside. Then, the food started rotting. Every time I'd open the fridge, I'd find raw meat, chicken, beef, even vegetables, covered in black mold, leaking brown liquid. Even if I'd bought it that same day. Claire started sleeping in the living room instead of our bed. One night, I woke up and saw her sitting on the floor, near the couch, her back to me. She wasn't asleep. She was rocking, slowly. Her nails had dug into her thighs, breaking the skin, but she didn't seem to notice. When I stepped closer, she whispered something. I leaned in, and my blood went cold. "It's in me now." The next morning, I heard people whispering outside. Nancy, a 5-year-old girl from 3B, had disappeared. Her mother was screaming, begging the police to find her. Claire was in the kitchen, humming. She turned to me, eyes dark, skin pale. "Did you hear?" I asked. "That little girl's missing." She just smiled. That's when I saw it. A tiny pink shoe, sticking out from under the couch. That night, I woke up to the sound of dripping. I followed it to the bathroom. The door was slightly open. A thick, metallic smell hit me, like copper and rotting meat. I flicked on the light. The tub was full of blood. Thick, dark red, swirling. Chunks of flesh floated on the surface. Claire stood in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection. She was smiling. Blood ran from her mouth, down her chin, staining her nightgown. Her hands were covered in it, fingers twitching, shaking. I tried to step back, but she turned. And something was wrong with her face. Her mouth was too wide. Her lips had split open, tearing at the corners, as if something had forced her to smile too much. She tilted her head. "You don't see it yet," she whispered. Her voice wasn't hers. It was deeper. Something else was speaking through her. Then, she reached into her own mouth and pulled out a tooth. Not just pulled, ripped. The gum tore open, blood pouring down her chin. She dropped it into the sink. Then she did it again. And again. One by one, she ripped out her own teeth, dropping them like wet pebbles. I ran. I locked myself in the bedroom. I could hear her laughing on the other side of the door. Then whispers. Soft, gentle, like a mother speaking to a baby. I pressed my ear against the door. I wish I hadn't. Because I heard another voice. A child's voice. "Mommy, let me out." I felt my stomach drop. Claire's voice came next. "Sure, baby. You're safe in there." "Inside where?" My hands were shaking as I slowly turned the knob. The door creaked open. Claire was on the floor, sitting cross-legged, her stomach moving. Something was pushing against her skin from the inside. Small hands. A tiny face pressing outward, stretching her stomach like it was a plastic sheet. Nancy. Nancy was inside her. Claire looked up at me, her mouth a black, bloody grin. "You don't understand," she whispered. Then she took a shard of glass from the broken mirror. And she stabbed herself in the stomach. Over and over. Blood poured out, soaking the carpet. She didn't scream. She just laughed. As she tore herself open. And I saw, Nancy's tiny, severed hands crawling out of her. I don't remember running. I don't remember leaving the building. All I know is, when the police found Claire's body, they never found Nancy's. It's been 6 months. I don't live at the Dakota anymore. But every night, at exactly 3:13 a.m., I wake up. And I hear a little girl's voice. "Mommy, let me out." And Claire's voice, whispering from the shadows. "Sure, baby. You're safe in there. She's still with me. And I don't think she's ever leaving." Emily and I had been together for 3 years. Our lives were routine but comfortable. Morning coffee, work, dinner, and late-night movies curled up on the couch. She was the kind of person who made even silence feel safe. Lately, though, she'd been talking in her sleep. At first, it was harmless, murmurs, half-formed words. Then full sentences, clear as if she were awake. "Don't let it in. It's watching." One night, I shook her gently. Wake up." Her eyes fluttered open, glassy. You were talking in your sleep again." She blinked slowly, then smiled. "Was I? What did I say?" I hesitated. "Nothing. Just nonsense." She kissed my cheek, already drifting back to sleep. But I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft rhythm of her breathing. Then one night, I woke up to a sound. It was my voice. "You should run." I bolted upright. Emily was sitting up in bed, staring at me. But her lips weren't moving. The words had come from her throat, but in my exact tone, my exact voice. My stomach turned ice cold. "Emily?" She just grinned. Then, one by one, her teeth started falling out, clinking against the wooden floor. I heard the wet sound of her tongue squelching as gaps opened in her gums. She gasped, choking, but her grin only stretched wider. Too wide. Then her fingers bent backward, bones pushing against the thin skin until they snapped with a sickening crunch. Her arms trembled, but she didn't scream. She only watched me. "It's wearing me," she whispered, thick with saliva and blood. "It's wearing me." I couldn't move. My breath hitched, my body frozen in place as she lifted shaking hands to her face. And then she started peeling. The skin came off in long, wet strips curling from her arms, her cheeks, her forehead. It sloughed away like a discarded mask, revealing the muscle and sinew underneath. But it wasn't just raw flesh. It was me. My own face, staring back at me, blood slick and grinning. I ran. I don't remember getting to the door. I don't remember how I ended up outside, barefoot in the freezing night air. But when I turned back, the bedroom was empty. The sheets were soaked red. Emily was gone. The next day, I searched the apartment. No trace of her. No blood. No broken teeth on the floor. Just an empty bed, as if she had never been there. But that night, as I brushed my teeth, I caught something in the mirror. My reflection smiled when I didn't. The following days were a haze of confusion and unease. I reported Emily missing, but the police seemed uninterested. "People leave all the time," the officer said, not even looking up from his paperwork. "Maybe she just needed space." But that didn't explain what I had seen. I took leave from work, unable to focus. Sleep came in fits, plagued by whispers and dreams of skin being stretched, faces being stolen. The air in the apartment felt heavier, like the walls were breathing. I avoided the mirrors. Then, 3 nights after Emily disappeared, my phone rang. It was her number. I hesitated before answering. "Hello?" Silence. Then a slow, ragged inhale. "It's wearing me." My stomach twisted. "Emily? Where are you? What's happening?" A wet, gurgling sound filled the line, followed by something soft hitting the floor. A faint clicking, like fingernails tapping against wood. Then, a whisper that wasn't hers. "It's waiting." The call disconnected. I threw the phone across the room, my breath coming in short gasps. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely pick it up again. The call log showed her number, but when I tried calling back, it went straight to voicemail. I didn't sleep that night. By the next evening, I was convinced I was losing my mind. My own reflection had started moving out of sync, its eyes following me even when I wasn't looking directly at it. My shadow felt wrong, stretched in ways it shouldn't be, shifting when I stood still. And then the knocks started. Soft at first, like fingertips brushing against the bedroom door. Then more insistent. A rhythmic, deliberate knock knock knock. I grabbed the heaviest thing I could find, a baseball bat, and edged toward the door. My pulse thundered in my ears. I forced myself to open it. Nothing. The hallway was empty. No sign of anyone. But when I turned back, something was written on the mirror in streaks of dark, glistening red. "Let me in." My breath hitched. The message dripped, the scent of copper thick in the air. Then I saw it. Not in the mirror, but behind me. A figure stood in the dim light of the bathroom. It had my face, but the skin was too loose, sagging in places like an ill-fitted mask. The mouth stretched into a grin too wide for a human jaw. The fingers were too long, curling at the tips like talons. And then it whispered in my voice. "You should run." I stumbled backward, knocking over the lamp. The room plunged into darkness. Something moved. The sound of skin dragging over the floor. The wet squelch of something shifting, rearranging itself. I ran. Out the door, down the stairs, into the street. My breath burned in my throat, my heart hammering. I didn't stop until I was blocks away, bent over, gasping. When I looked back, the windows of my apartment were dark. But I knew it was still inside. And it was still wearing me. The next morning, I packed whatever I could carry and left town. Drove until the gas light came on, then kept driving after refueling. The further I got, the lighter I felt. But deep down, I knew distance wouldn't matter. Because that night, in the dingy motel bathroom, I glanced at the mirror. And my reflection didn't move. It just grinned. Then it spoke in my voice. "You should run." I used to come home to silence. Before my wife got pregnant, our house was nothing but a quiet space where we existed together. Dinner at the kitchen table, dishes left to soak overnight, the glow of the television painting lazy shapes on the walls. A life of waiting, hoping. We tried for years. Years of failed tests, of doctor visits that ended in quiet disappointment. Then, finally, she was pregnant. The first ultrasound showed something strange. The heartbeat was too fast. Almost like two hearts beating at once. The doctor brushed it off. "Some irregularities are normal in early pregnancy," he said. "Let's monitor it." We decorated the nursery in soft blues and creams. My wife would sit in the rocking chair, running her hands over her swollen belly, whispering to our unborn child. "You'll be here soon," she murmured one night. I was in bed, watching from the doorway. Her voice sounded different. Like something layered beneath it. A harmony that wasn't hers. The day she went into labor, the house was different. The walls seemed closer. The air thicker. We rushed to the hospital, her screams bouncing off the car's interior. Then, as the contractions hit harder, she started screaming in a voice that wasn't hers. The doctor paled. The nurses exchanged glances. The beeping machines whined at irregular pitches. And when the baby came out, they screamed. Because it wasn't a baby. It was a rotting, blackened thing, its flesh peeling like burned paper, its tiny mouth full of needle-like teeth. The umbilical cord coiled around its body like a noose. Its eyes, milky white, too large for its face, locked onto my wife's as it crawled up her body. She sobbed, thrashing against the bed, but the thing dug its clawed fingers into her flesh, dragging itself closer. Then, with a sound like wet wood splintering, its mouth opened wide. "I've been waiting," it whispered. I ran. I don't know what happened to my wife. I don't know what happened to the doctors, the nurses, or anyone in that room. I don't know how I made it out, but when I reached the parking lot, my hands were covered in blood that wasn't mine. It's been 6 months. I moved to a new city, took a job stocking shelves at a dead-end grocery store. I don't talk to anyone. My phone rings sometimes, but the caller ID is always unknown. I don't answer. Every night, I hear tiny footsteps outside my door. At first, I thought it was my imagination. Maybe rats, or the neighbor's kid running down the hall. But then, the giggling started. Not a normal baby's laugh. Something broken. Like bones grinding together, like something that doesn't understand how laughter is supposed to sound. Last night, I woke up to whispers. From inside the apartment. I grabbed the baseball bat from under my bed, crept toward the hallway. The air smelled wrong. Like rotting meat and something foul, something old. And then, I saw it. Sitting in the middle of the floor. Its blackened, peeling skin stretched over a too small frame. Needle-like teeth glinting in the moonlight. It smiled at me. "Daddy," it whispered. I moved into an apartment near the French Quarter of New Orleans. The building, a crumbling testament to a bygone era, boasted peeling paint, wrought iron balconies that groaned in the humid breeze, and a history thick enough to choke on. My roommate, Evan, was a mystery wrapped in shadows. He was tall and gaunt, with eyes that seemed perpetually shadowed, even in the brightest sunlight. He was quiet, almost unnervingly so, but in the chaotic energy of New Orleans, I didn't think much of it. I needed a cheap place, and this was it. The first few weeks were unremarkable. Evan kept to himself, emerging only for brief forays into the kitchen, where he'd consume his meals in silence. He smelled faintly of damp earth and something else, something subtly acrid, like burnt sugar and old bone. I tried to strike up conversations, but they always died quickly, leaving me with the unsettling feeling that I was talking to a wall. Or perhaps something worse. Then came the whispers. One night, I woke to a low, sibilant murmuring that seemed to emanate from the kitchen. It wasn't a language I recognized, more a series of hisses and clicks, laced with an undercurrent of something chillingly feminine. Sleepiness banished, a knot tightening in my stomach, I cautiously slipped out of bed and crept towards the source of the sound. The kitchen was plunged in darkness, illuminated only by the faint, ethereal glow of the streetlight filtering through the gap in the curtains. Evan stood motionless in the center of the room, his back to me, his silhouette stark against the pale light. He was talking. Not to himself, not to me, but to something. Something in the shadowed corner, near the ancient, chipped butcher block. My heart hammered against my ribs. I strained to see, but the corner remained stubbornly obscure. There was no one there. I could feel the hairs on my arms prickling, a cold dread washing over me that had nothing to do with the oppressive New Orleans humidity. The whispering ceased abruptly. Evan turned, the faint light catching his face. His eyes were wide, unnaturally bright, reflecting the streetlight with an almost unnatural luminescence. He didn't seem surprised to see me. The next morning, I attempted to broach the topic of the previous night's events. "Evan," I began, my voice trembling slightly. "I heard voices last night. Were you talking to someone?" He just stared at me, his gaze unnervingly intense. Then, a slow, chilling smile spread across his lips. "You don't see her?" he said, his voice a low rasp. That night the whispers returned, but this time they were accompanied by a different kind of sound, a frantic scratching, a skittering that seemed to originate from within the walls themselves. It was a sound that burrowed under my skin, a relentless scratching that echoed the frantic beating of my own heart. Then came 3:06 a.m. I woke to a crushing weight on my chest. Evan's face was inches from mine, illuminated by the sickly green glow of my digital clock. He was grinning, a wide, feral grin that exposed teeth that were too sharp, too long. His fingers were digging into my flesh, leaving crescent-shaped marks that burned with a strange, icy heat. "I need a new body," he whispered, his voice a venomous caress. I tried to scream, to fight, but the strength had drained from me. Darkness closed in, swallowing me whole. I awoke to the pale light of dawn, my body aching, bruised. Evan was gone. The kitchen was clean, devoid of any sign of his nocturnal activities. The only evidence of the previous night's horror was the deep, raw imprint of his fingers on my skin. I packed my bags, fleeing the apartment, leaving behind the chilling whispers, the scratching in the walls, and the lingering scent of burnt sugar and old bone. I didn't look back. Weeks later, driven by a morbid curiosity, I contacted the building's management. I learned that the apartment had been vacant for several months before I moved in. The new tenant, a young woman named Chloe, had called me a few days after I moved out. She had a question. A question that sent a fresh wave of icy dread through me. "I met Evan before I moved in," she said, her voice shaking slightly at the other end of the line. "He said he was waiting for me. He said he had been waiting for a very long time." I hung up, my hands trembling. The internet search on the apartment yielded little information from local newspapers and records. But in the depths of a forgotten city archive I found it. A news clipping, yellowed and brittle with age, detailing the death of a man named Evan 5 years prior. He had died in that apartment. The cause of death was listed simply as unexplained. The police report mentioned strange scratches on the walls and whispers heard by neighbors. But that was all. 5 years. 5 years he had been waiting. Waiting for a new body. For a new victim. The chilling realization settled in my bones, cold and heavy. His gaze, his smile, his words echoed in my mind as I found a news article depicting a young woman, Chloe, missing from the French Quarter, with a description matching that of the new tenant. The article stated a witness saw her enter Evan's former apartment, not exiting for days. She was found later, lifeless, in the same building. The scratching in the walls, the whispers, the feeling of something watching, it would stay with me forever. A dark, chilling reminder of the apartment near the French Quarter in New Orleans and the spectral inhabitant who was not so quietly waiting for his next victim. The city's mystic shadows had claimed another, and I felt a cold certainty that it wouldn't be the last. The whispers continue, faint but persistent, haunting me in the quiet hours of the night, a constant reminder of the horrors of that apartment, and the insatiable hunger of the man who died, and yet still lives. I never believed in the supernatural. To me, ghosts, demons, and all that folklore nonsense were just stories people told to scare themselves. I was a man of routine. Wake up at 6 a.m., hit the gym, grab a coffee from the corner shop, then slog through another day at the office. Rinse and repeat. Life was predictable. Safe. Until the night I woke up and saw myself standing in my closet. At first, I thought I was dreaming. The figure was shrouded in darkness, its outline barely distinguishable from the black void behind it. But when the light from the street lamp filtered through my window, illuminating its face, my breath hitched. It was me. My own eyes stared back at me, but there was something off. A wrongness I couldn't pinpoint. Then it smiled. A slow, stretching, impossible smile. I couldn't move. It stepped forward, whispering in my own voice. "You're in the wrong body." My chest tightened, my breath shallow. Every part of my brain screamed that this wasn't real, that I was hallucinating. Then it raised its hands and dug its fingers into its own face, my face, ripping away strips of flesh like peeling wet paper. Beneath, something black shifted, writhing as if 1,000 slithering things were just beneath the surface. Its eyes were no longer mine. They were deep, endless pits of hunger. A void looking back at me. I finally screamed, and it vanished. The room was empty again. The closet door stood ajar, revealing nothing but the neatly hung clothes and old sneakers on the floor. My heart pounded against my ribs, sweat clinging to my skin. I told myself it was a nightmare. Just a nightmare. But the next morning, when I stumbled into the bathroom and looked in the mirror, something felt off. My reflection moved half a second too late. A lag, almost imperceptible, but there. I leaned in closer, watching, waiting. My own face stared back, expressionless, then, the corner of its mouth twitched. I hadn't moved. I stumbled back, hard hammering. My hands were shaking as I splashed water on my face, telling myself I was overtired, stressed, maybe even getting sick. But when I turned to grab a towel, I heard it. A whisper. "Let me in." It came from the closet. I froze. My stomach lurched as bile crept up my throat. The closet door was closed, but a soft tapping sounded from the other side, like fingertips against wood. I backed away slowly, refusing to blink. The tapping stopped. Silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Then, the door burst open. A shape lunged at me, its mouth yawning too wide, its fingers reaching. I scrambled back, slipping on the tile, my head cracking against the sink. Dazed, I tried to push myself up, but it was already on me, its weight pinning me down. My own face loomed inches from mine, eyes filled with something not human. "You're in the wrong body." It hissed again, and this time, I felt its breath, hot, rancid, like rotting meat. Its fingers pressed against my skin, nails digging deep as if trying to peel me open. Pain flared, sharp and searing, as the flesh of my forearm began to tear. I screamed, thrashing, but its grip was inhumanly strong. Then, just as suddenly, it vanished. I gasped for air, clutching my bleeding arm, my head spinning. I was alone again. The bathroom door was open, the mirror reflecting a single, undeniable truth. My reflection was still smiling. And then it whispered, "Soon." The following nights were worse. I began hearing the whispers constantly. Not just from the closet, but from behind me, from my own mouth when I wasn't speaking. My own voice mocking me, telling me how fragile I was, how easily I could be replaced. I stopped sleeping. Every night I felt it watching, waiting for a moment of weakness. The lights in my apartment flickered at random, and shadows moved where none should be. Even when I wasn't looking in a mirror, I could feel something staring back at me. One night, I bolted the closet door shut. I piled furniture against it, barricading myself in my room. But at 3:33 a.m., the whispering started again. "Let me in." The barricade didn't matter. The door creaked open, slow and deliberate. My breath hitched as a shadow poured out, forming into my shape. It slithered toward me, too fluid, too wrong. I turned to run, but my reflection in the dresser mirror twisted, stepping out of the glass. I was surrounded. One grabbed me, its fingers stretching, merging into my skin. I felt myself dissolving, my flesh unraveling like thread. My own screams filled the room as they pulled me apart, my body folding into the darkness. The last thing I saw was my own face watching, smiling as my doppelganger took my place. And then I was gone. Now my body walks the earth. It wears my skin, speaks in my voice, lives my life. And every night, from the void where I am trapped, I whisper back, "Let me in." I sat at the breakfast table, sipping my coffee as my wife, Laura, packed the kids' lunches. The smell of buttered toast and eggs filled the air, and the quiet chatter of morning cartoons played in the background. My son, Daniel, was engrossed in his cereal, while little Emma played with her toy giraffe, humming an off-key tune. It was a picture-perfect morning, just like every morning in our suburban home. Yet, beneath the surface, something gnawed at me. Something I couldn't quite understand. As I drove to work, I saw them. Children everywhere. At the bus stops, in front yards, holding their parents' hands as they crossed the street. It wasn't unusual, but today, the urge clawed at me again. My fingers gripped the steering wheel tighter as my chest tightened. It was the cheeks. Round. Plump. Soft. My mind conjured the sensation of pressing my fingers into the tender flesh, feeling the skin stretch, watching the delicate pink deepen into red. The thought of hearing their startled cries, their innocent wails, it sent a pulse of heat through my veins. I swallowed hard, forcing my gaze back to the road. At the office, I tried to drown out the intrusive thoughts. I distracted myself with paperwork, emails, the mundane rhythm of adulthood. But then lunchtime arrived, and a coworker brought his son to the break room. A boy no older than 6. I froze. The child's cheeks were full of laughter, dimples forming as he giggled at something on his dad's phone. I felt my breath hitch. I imagined reaching out, grasping the soft flesh, pulling until it bruised, until tears welled up in the child's big, innocent eyes. My stomach churned with an unsettling mix of desire and revulsion. I clenched my fists and left the break room. The days passed, and the urges grew stronger. At the grocery store, at the park, even at home. Daniel's cheeks were just as round, just as soft. But he was my son. That was different. Wasn't it? One night, as I was tucking Emma into bed, she reached out and cupped my face with her tiny hands. "Daddy, why do you look sad?" I forced a smile. "I'm not, sweetheart." She kissed my nose and giggled. "You're silly." I kissed her forehead, lingering there for a moment, inhaling the warmth of her skin. That night I dreamt of screams. I dreamt of red-stained fingers and children sobbing, their cheeks purple and swollen. I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had to stop this. I had to. But the next day I couldn't. I found myself in a quiet alley behind an elementary school, my breath ragged, my hands shaking. Then I saw her, a little girl, no older than 7, walking alone with her pink backpack bouncing with each step. I stepped forward. My hands reached out. Her skin was softer than I imagined. Warmer. The first squeeze made her gasp. The second made her cry. And then I couldn't stop. The memory of that day haunts me. I remember how she screamed, how her face contorted in pain. The way she dropped her little backpack as her tiny hands clawed at mine, trying to pull away. I can still hear her sobs echoing in my skull, still feel the way my fingers trembled against her flesh, my breath coming in sharp gasps as the rush of something dark and primal took over me. I don't know when I let go. Maybe it was when she dropped to the pavement, sobbing, her face red and swollen. Maybe it was when I heard footsteps approaching and realized someone might see me. But I ran. I ran faster than I ever had in my life, heart pounding in my ears, my vision tunneling. At home, I locked myself in the bathroom, gripping the edges of the sink as I stared at my reflection. I was shaking, my face pale, my pupils dilated. I had done it. I had given in. And the worst part? I liked it. I felt alive in a way I never had before. My fingers tingled with the memory of her skin, my ears still ringing with her cries. I should have felt guilty. I should have been disgusted with myself. But all I felt was hunger. The next day, I avoided the news. I was terrified that someone had seen me, that there would be reports of an attack, a description of my face, a police sketch that looked just a little too much like me. But there was nothing. Just another normal day. And so, it continued. The urges didn't fade. They intensified. Every time I saw a child, the hunger flared inside me, demanding to be fed. I started taking longer routes home, lingering near schools, watching children as they laughed and played. Their innocence taunted me, beckoned me. I fought it for a while. I tried. But the craving was insatiable. And one night, I found myself back at that alley. Another child. Another pair of soft, round cheeks. I don't remember how long I held on that time. I just remember the sound of sirens in the distance, the way my pulse roared in my ears as I fled. Now, as I sit here writing this, I know I'm too far gone. I should feel remorse. I should feel guilt. But all I feel is the ache in my fingers, the hunger twisting inside me, the unbearable craving for just one more squeeze. Just one more cry. And then maybe I can rest. Maybe. But I doubt it. I was 16 when the rot seeped into my life, a miasma clinging to the air thicker than the Tennessee humidity. It started subtly, a faint, metallic tang that I dismissed as the scent of the woods pressing in on our isolated house on the outskirts of Knoxville. Our home, nestled deep within a sea of trees, had always felt off. Not unsettling in a haunted house way, but an annoying, persistent unease mirroring my mother's own quiet, distant demeanor. She loved me, or so I'd told myself. So I believed. Until the blood. That evening, the usual quiet of our home was shattered by a sickening, metallic shriek that emanated from the kitchen. I found her there, hunched over the stainless steel sink, her pale arms slick and crimson, the lifeblood staining the porcelain a gruesome shade of ruby. A large butcher knife, its blade gleaming malevolently, lay on the counter, weeping red rivulets onto the checkered linoleum. My stomach lurched. The smell was suddenly, brutally overwhelming, a cloying blend of copper and something indescribably foul, the putrid scent of decay that had been hinting at something sinister for weeks. "What happened?" I managed, my voice a strangled whisper. She turned, her face an impassive mask. With a practiced ease that chilled me to the bone, she wiped her hands on a tea towel, leaving faint, bloody fingerprints on the faded fabric. "I had to take care of something," she said, her voice flat, devoid of any emotion. The casualness of her words was far more terrifying than any scream. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the suffocating silence. The smell was thicker now, a suffocating blanket woven with the horrifying reality of what I'd just witnessed. I should have turned and run. I should have bolted, escaped the suffocating horror that was beginning to engulf me. But a morbid curiosity, a macabre fascination, rooted me to the spot. The trail of blood was a gruesome breadcrumb trail, a crimson path leading from the kitchen, through the hallway, and towards the basement door. It was ajar, a sliver of darkness beckoning me into the unknown. I hesitated, paralyzed by a mixture of fear and morbid fascination. Then, driven by a compulsion I couldn't control, I stepped inside. The basement air hung heavy and warm, thick with the buzzing of flies, a morbid symphony of decay. The air itself tasted of death, a metallic tang that coated my tongue. At the bottom of the creaking stairs, sprawled across the cold, damp concrete floor, lay a man. His eyes were wide, vacant, staring up at the unseen ceiling, frozen in a silent scream. His throat was a ragged, gaping wound, a brutal testament to violence. His head, barely attached, lolled to one side. The floor around him was a grotesque tapestry of dark, almost black blood, staining the aged wood a macabre, permanent hue. I stumbled back, the bile rising in my throat and choking me. The image burned itself onto my retinas, a gruesome portrait I would never forget. That was Mr. Holloway, our neighbor. Kind, quiet Mr. Holloway, who always offered me rides to school when my mother was too busy. Mr. Holloway, who was supposed to be out of town this week. I turned and fled, my legs pumping, fueled by primal terror. I ran back to the kitchen, my mother still there, methodically rinsing the knife under the faucet. The water ran crimson and then cleared, washing away the evidence, as if she were cleaning up a simple spill. "Why?" I choked out, the words racking my body. "What did you do?" She sighed, a weary, almost bored sound. "He was getting too close. Asking too many questions." "Too close to what?" I demanded, my voice cracking under the weight of the horrific reality. She turned, her gaze locking onto mine. And in that moment I saw it. The chilling, vacant emptiness behind her eyes, a void devoid of remorse, devoid of humanity. It was a look that spoke of countless atrocities, a look that confirmed the horrifying truth dawning within me. "To the truth," she whispered, her voice eerily calm. This isn't the first time, is it?" I stammered, my voice barely audible, my mind struggling to comprehend the grotesque truth unfolding before me. She smiled. It wasn't a cruel, sadistic smile, nor was it smug. It was simply matter-of-fact. "No, baby. It's not." I stumbled backward, my body trembling uncontrollably. "How many?" I croaked, the question hanging in the air, heavy with dread. She tilted her head, her expression almost contemplative as she considered her grim arithmetic. I stopped counting after 20, she said, her voice barely a murmur against the background hum of the refrigerator. A wave of nausea washed over me, so violent it threatened to send me sprawling. My mother. My mother. A serial killer. The truth, once a distant, horrifying possibility, was now a hideous, inescapable reality. I thought of running, of calling the police, of escaping this nightmare. But as if reading my mind, she wiped the blade clean and set it gently on the counter, the action as casual as setting down a teacup. You won't say anything, she said, her voice calm, unwavering, a chilling certainty in her tone. Because you love me. And because you understand. I wanted to scream, to protest, to deny the horrifying bond that seemed to link us, but deep down, in the darkest recesses of my soul, a chilling realization began to bloom. She was right. A terrifying, sickening understanding began to take root, mirroring the festering decay that had permeated our lives. I couldn't deny it. I couldn't escape this grotesque bond. That night, sleep never came. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside, sounded like a predator's approach. I heard her footsteps, slow and deliberate, in the hallway outside my room. Was she checking on me? Or was she waiting for me to try and escape? I remained frozen, stiff as a corpse, until the first light of dawn bled through my window. The days that followed were a blur of calculated normalcy. My mother continued her routine, her quiet demeanor masking the horrors I now knew. The smell, however, lingered, clinging to the house, to my clothes, to me. It was a constant reminder of the grisly truth, a silent, suffocating presence. I never told anyone. Not the police, not my friends, not even my therapist years later when the nightmares finally became too much to bear. It was a secret I carried, a heavy, suffocating weight that threatened to crush me, binding me to my mother in a horrifying communion of blood and silence. But sometimes, late at night, when the silence is broken only by the rhythmic tick of the old clock in the hall, I think about what she said. You understand. And I wonder if she was right. If, in the echoing darkness of my soul, a twisted version of understanding had taken root. If the years of isolation and silence, the unsettling presence of the forest, and the distant coldness of my mother's love, had somehow prepared me for this. If, in some perverse way, I had become complicit. The smell never truly left. It intensified with each passing year, a constant, ghastly reminder of the night my world shattered, the night I learned the truth about my mother, the night I realized I would forever be stained with her darkness. A darkness I may have, in some horrifying way, always understood. Even if I never wanted to.